Hello and welcome to the programme. So a Ukrainian court has released Volodymyr Tsemakh from custody. Although a Ukrainian national, he was a commander of the Russian-led anti-aircraft forces suspected of involvement in the downing of Malaysia Flight MH17 that killed all 298 people on board back in 2014. Dutch-led investigators prior to this voiced their concern that they may be unable to interview him if he were to be freed. Now, to discuss this and more, we are joined in the studio today by Nadia Volkova, Director at the Ukrainian Legal Advisory Group. Hi, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
So this is an incredibly interesting case, both politically and legally as well. Mr. Tsemakh was freed yesterday, without bail, without many conditions, apart from the fact that he had to appear in court if required to do so. So what is this term and how has this decision been made, in your opinion? Because the particular judge in this court didn't make the decision, is that right? It was actually other judges in a higher court, or am I wrong there?
It was a court of appeal, yes. It was a court of appeal who made the decision, and it is a measure that is envisaged by the criminal procedure code under personal obligation. But yes, the strange thing in this case is that this is a person of highest interest to both Ukrainian authorities and joint investigation team, and as we all know, also to Mr. Putin. So to let him go and just impose the condition of personal obligation is a little bit strange. Yeah,
and what was also strange, perhaps you can explain more about how terms like witness and suspect differ in terms of the legal code.
Sure. Obviously, if it's a suspect, then he's implicated in the commission of an offence or a serious crime in this case. If he is a witness, that means that it's not a serious status in a way, but also in the case of Mr. Tsemakh, he's a valuable witness to the effect that he can be very useful if he really the person who the authorities think him to be, and he has that knowledge. So that means that he is
so he's a person of interest.
Yeah,
really?
He is of high interest. Yes, and that's what the GIT have been calling him as well. I mean, they sort of say that he is a person of interest. That yes, he is a witness, but also he could potentially be a suspect depending on the investigation.
Yeah. And politically and legally, it's a very difficult situation as well, because he's actually a Ukrainian citizen. So there would be no extradition to Russia.
Exactly. I mean, extradition of Ukrainian nationals is forbidden by Ukrainian constitution. But what for instance, the Dutch authorities could have done, they could have, because there is a cooperation agreement in place between Ukraine and the Netherlands. So the Dutch authorities could have come to Ukraine and questioned him here. And then obviously they would have thought through a scheme or some format for him to be in The Hague and testify in court.
Yeah, and this gentleman was captured in June. Very risky SBU operation in sort of occupied territory, and he was brought back to Kiev. I mean, what sort of measures are usually imposed on these sorts of, let's say, people of interest? For example, house arrest. Is there some certain term of time that people have to interview and interrogate this suspect?
Sure. I mean, legally by the code, they can hold him. The investigation could last up to a year, and this is the period that they could hold him for, detain him for, with every 3 months extension of detention. But obviously, if it were done in accordance with all the, right legal standards, the authorities, the prosecution would need to give explanation as to why they are proposing to detain a person every 3 months.
Yeah.
But in Ukraine, usually, especially with this category of suspects, is sort of done on almost automatic basis. I mean, it's not exactly a very correct application of the law, but nevertheless, this is almost an established practice, because there are so many people who are charged with the article that Mr. Tsemakh was charged with, Article 258.
So it's a normal procedure?
Sort of, yes, because there are so many of people like this being detained and charged with the participation in terrorist organization. I believe 258.3. So this is the article in criminal code, and they usually detained and kept in pretrial detention. That's why it's legally sort of such a weird decision.
Yes, it is. And I mean, how could it be justified? Because usually when these decisions are made, the reason why they are made is made public. But in this case, as far as I'm aware, I haven't seen any reports, certainly in Ukrainian media outlets, how they came to that conclusion. Is there a legal framework that you're aware of how they could have done this? Or do you think there was sort of political pressure to get this verdict through?
Well, I think they just, his lawyers appealed the decision to detain him, because every time that the court extends detention, then the defense can appeal the decision. And so this was the case of appealing the decision, and the appeal was granted legally. But of course, it's a political decision, but it remains to be seen why it was taken, either to exchange him, this is one version, because it was one of the allegedly Putin's demands in order to return Ukrainian prisoners kept by Russian authorities, or maybe it is some sort of procedure to get him to The Hague, which we don't know about either.
Yeah, and that's the thing with this case, is that actually sort of the legal aspect of it is very much still unknown as well.
Yeah, it is, yes. And of course, the Dutch authorities have been going quite sort of not pushing too much pressure, at least from the outset, on the Ukrainian authorities in terms of not letting him go, because obviously they realize if they come to Ukraine and question him now, then he will be of no value to Putin.
Right, yeah. And actually, I thought this was a really interesting argument of the prosecution, who, I mean, obviously they said that he might abscond, which is a very real possibility now, but also the fact that the prosecution argued his life is at risk because he knows too much, basically. Not in Ukraine, but if he crosses over into the occupied territories, into Russia, then that's it.
But not even that. I don't think he is safe even on Ukrainian territory. Yeah. I mean, we've had many cases where, people have been, cars been blown up, people shot in the street. So, happens.
So, yeah. Oh, that's interesting. And what sort of arguments did the defense have? Or was there not really an argument?
I don't think, because it's a political decision, I don't think they needed to try too hard to come up with, convincing arguments. If they said that he would abscond, they didn't justify it. They hardly ever do. Same as, yes, he's high flight risk. Of course he is, but that was the idea why, he was let go.
Yeah. And do you think that this damages, to a certain extent, the integrity of the courts if such a decision is made? I know I was speaking to a few of my colleagues who were there when the decision was handed out, and they said that everyone in the room was shocked.
On the one hand, yes, but I think shock came rather from the fact that there is an allegation that basically it was done so that he could be exchanged for Ukrainian political prisoners, and thereby Ukrainian leadership, who sort of approved of such a decision, court's decision, they've bent it to Russia. rather than maintain an effective cooperation and striving for justice in MH17 case, which is a very important case for Ukraine as well as for, the Dutch and whoever, and British, whoever was on that flight and died, generally for the victims. So that's why everybody was shocked. I think the majority of people expected that Ukraine would try and cooperate with the Dutch rather than bending to Russia's demands.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for coming into our studio today.
Thank you.
And obviously we'll keep us updated on this particular case. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was Nadia Volkova, Director at Ukrainian Legal Advisory Group. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for more here on UATV.